Good morning or good evening, everyone, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to this reuse webinar on passive voice. It's a short webinar, so I will start immediately. First, I will do a short presentation of Reuse Company and myself. Then I will cover the aspect of what is actually passive voice. Then I will talk a little bit on what it actually can do to a project. And then we will look into how can these requirements that have passive voice be detected, and I will perform a very short and brief presentation of our tool RQA. We will not have time for questions and answers during this 15 minutes webinar, so you could post them to me after the webinar through my email. So first, briefly, Reuse Company, we are a combination of systems and software engineering firm and we have a kind of a foot in both academia and industry. And our goal is to develop and produce softwares that helps you in doing smart systems engineering using a semantic approach to help you. And myself, I've been working with the Reuse Company for approximately 5 years now, and I've been doing systems and software engineering for a couple of decades. So over to the topic. What is actually passive voice? When we talk about passive voice, you really have to look into these two different meanings that we have, these two sentences I have below here. First, an active sentence. The engineer blew up the bridge. We have the subject, the engineer, that performs an action to blow up something, and the object is the bridge. And what does it mean when we talk about passive voice? It actually means that the object and the subject change place. So a passive meaning, saying exactly the same thing, sounds the bridge was blown up by the engineer. And you might think, is that a problem? What does it actually mean when we are formulating requirements which are supposed to be correct and is supposed to actually show the receiver of the requirement exactly what is supposed to be done? Keep that in your head for a minute. When we formalize requirements or write requirements, we do that very often in a project setting. And in a project, we typically not just have one type of requirements. And those requirements are typically not mixed up, so they are put in different kind of specifications, depending on what they actually are supposed to cover. You can have a project specification, it might be called a statement of work. Then you of course have a lot of different technical requirement specifications where you have different system of interests which you are describing. And then you can have specifications that cover later phases in your system development cycle or in the system life cycle, actually talking about kind of transition or support activities that it's supposed to be performed. And I want you to keep that in mind when we continue this discussion. Because if you take this example, critical errors shall be detected within 1 minute from occurrence. It sounds okay, doesn't it? I think I understand what it is, okay? But it is actually clear for all the stakeholders in the project. Can we have a situation where people actually think on this requirement in different ways? And I would say absolutely. And I will show you why. And when we try to explain how you are supposed to write good requirements, we typically tell you to use patterns. And that's a structured way of writing your requirements. And this is an example from EARS saying that you should basically put the wording in a proper position so that you have a correct requirement at the end of the day. And if you're not skilled enough and been doing this very often, you might actually think that this requirement, critical errors shall be detected within 1 minute from occurrence, actually fit the pattern. And it's quite obvious that we need to have some more guidance here. And now I'm coming to what is actually the reason for this. If you take this requirement and you actually are a different kind of stakeholder, you can absolutely mix them up. Because this requirement, if it's a system function, it actually describes that the system should do something. It still says critical errors shall be detected within 1 minute from occurrence. Then it's a kind of system function. But if I instead put this requirement in a support agreement, then it's actually the contractor that is supposed to do something completely else. So exactly the same meaning, exactly the same sentence can have two absolutely different meanings. So the problems are actually that the subject is hidden. The subject in this case is in the heading, the system, the contractor, and you can't see it in the sentence itself. And so you don't really know who is performing the action to detect something, okay? And the object is critical errors. That's actually what is supposed to be performed, okay? What is the end of the action? And what happens if the requirement is copied or moved somewhere else? It can absolutely shift meaning. And that's very typical in organization that we do copy paste, right? So be very careful. And how can you detect these problems? Yeah, like every other problem you might have in your requirements, you're probably used to that you review your requirements to find these defects. And I would say that having passive voice requirements is super hard to detect. Even if you're clever enough to use the guide to write requirements, and you are clever enough to try to look for these kind of sentences that include in this example shall be doing something, that's an indication of a passive voice, or you can use clever tools like our requirements quality analyzer. So let's do a very short and brief demo. I'm really feeling that I'm actually having a very high pace here, so please follow me if you can. In this instance, I've connected to a specification that includes 547 requirements. I've created a baseline, meaning that I've described what kind of things are we looking for. And in this instance, we are looking for only passive voice. So we have 3 metrics defined. Just one is enabled, and that's to look for passive voice. That's the simplest one. Then we have a couple of versions, which is actually looking for passive voice after the modal verb, the shall. So before the shall, it's fine. Or if you write requirements using conditions, like when, if, and so on and so forth, it might be okay in the condition, but not outside of the condition. So it's 2 different versions. But in this presentation, I will only show you the basic one. So let's see what happens. Now we are performing a review of these requirements, and we are looking for possible passive voice. And this is absolutely true requirements. I've not mixed or written these by myself. They are actually requirements from a procurement project. And you see that 3 stars are good, 1 star is bad. And there is actually 42% of the requirements have some kind of passive voice in them. And I can click and I can see that it's 118 different passive voices detected of different types. And of course, when you have just one, it might be, okay. But if you have 118 passive voice requirements in a specification, there might be huge problems and misunderstandings just because of that. So let's look into our requirement now. The example, critical errors shall be detected within 1 minute. Of course, we have passive voice be detected. Let's see if we can just simply rewrite them using a pattern, because pattern will actually help you if you use them correctly. I've created a very simple pattern saying that you should start with a definite article, the, then a noun, then a modal verb, which is a shall, then some kind of verb like detect, and then I can have a wildcard for anything, just, you know, filling up the sentence so it makes sense. So the system shall detect, and there's a wildcard, so I can write anything. I will just paste the sentence I had from the beginning. Of course, it's now wrong, so I have to fine-tune it so it's actually right again. Critical errors shall be detected within 1 minute from occurrence. And now it's perfectly fine, both when it comes to fitting the pattern, but also when it comes to not having passive voice. And that's exactly what I'm meaning. You should try to avoid passive voice. And now it's fine. Now it's a 3-star requirement. So now we can continue to the rest of your requirements, or you can just, you know, like in this instance, quit the demo. I still have 114 requirements to fix, but I will do that another day. So what am I saying? This sentence, you have to detect it, first of all. Not just detect that it says detect, but you know that it's passive voice. Then you have to do some systems engineering to define, is this actually a function? Then you have to write the proper functional requirement, or is it some other type of requirement, like in this case, a service level requirement. And I've also been a little bit extra clever and indicated that depending on what type of requirement it is, it also has a different requirements ID. So now they can't be mixed up. And you can absolutely have the instance where you have both. This is a system requirement, and this is a requirement for the contractor to perform some action after the system delivery. And again, and this is something we have to cover in another webinar, if you have the possibility to also fine-tune what is the system, like if you have a product breakdown structure and a defined system, you could actually lock this, so you can just mention what is the actual system or system element that is performing this function. But that's something we can cover some other day. So the solution is to first of all detect using to detect passive voice, and you should absolutely think on using some kind of tool, because it's super hard to find this yourself. You should rewrite them using patterns, because they will guide you into writing correct requirements. But you should do some clever thinking. Is it a system, or is it another type of requirement? So you should have a clear subject. And then don't forget, these requirements need to be structured for readability, meaning that if you put them into a paper document, you should think on the reader of that document. In what order are the requirements supposed to be? Can you add some other information that increases the readability? But that's not the scope of this webinar. And that's actually the end for me. So I hope you have enjoyed this. You could absolutely send me questions after the webinar if you want. I also want to say that the next webinar will be a slightly longer one, and it will describe how we manage traceability between different sources of information. It's held on October 11 or October 13, so please visit our website and register for that webinar. And if you're interested in more information like this webinar, it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, where you will find a lot of other types of webinars. So saying that, I would say thank you very much for tuning in for this very brief webinar on passive voice. And by saying that, I wish you a very nice day. Thank you and goodbye.